Myrkul, sometimes known as the Lord of Bones, is perhaps the most quiet of the Dead Three. The trio of former mortals turned former gods, slain and later returned as quasi-deities. He lacks the bombastic presence of Bane and the in-your-face attitude of Baal, having largely spent his time in the background, quietly observing and performing his duties as god of the dead. Though make no mistake, Myrkul was and is thoroughly evil, but his approach was always a little more subtle than that of his comrades. In life, Myrkul was the only one of the trio whose name we know, called Myrkul Bey al-Kursi, and he was a necromancer of incredible power, who along with his comrades sought godhood in a quest across the plains, succeeding in slaying one of the lost gods and taking on the portfolio of Lord of the Dead from the former holder of the title, the then weary Jergal, something I went into some detail on in my video about Bane and Jergal, which I will link below. Bane had the first choice of portfolios, and Myrkul second, but even so, Myrkul was quite pleased with the title of Lord of the Dead. Never as popular as Bane or even as Baal, he nevertheless was universally regarded with fear across Faerun, and as a god, Myrkul had a cold, malignant intelligence, and spoke almost as if whispering. He was always alert, and virtually nothing ever surprised him. He was never known to lose his temper or be anything other than coldly amused when a mortal, on the rare occasion, succeeded in avoiding his directives or chosen fate. His influence in Faerun was always imposed through fear and subtle means, and he enjoyed making mortals terrified of him. At times, just to remain unpredictable, he would seem almost kind and caring. His cowled skull head was the stuff of nightmares across all Faerun, and he was the one deity that almost all human mortals could picture clearly, the very embodiment of the traditional image of the Grim Reaper. Myrkul always took care that all mortals thought of him often, with one of his favorite pastimes having been materializing beside open graves, scythe in hand, just to gaze around at gathering mourners for a few silent breaths before fading away, in order to remind each and every one of them that he was waiting for them all, and that none could escape him. The time of troubles marked a period of great transition in Faerun, when Bane and Myrkul stole the Tablets of Fate from Eo, the Overgod, in a vain attempt to weaken it, mistakenly believing the tablets to be tied to his power. Bane led the conspiracy with Myrkul in tow, and in response, Eo cast down all of the gods from their planar realms. As many of you know, the end result of this was the destruction of Bane, for a time at least. And Myrkul too was slain by the then mage Midnight, who would later ascend to become the goddess Mystra. However, just before Myrkul's essence was completely dispersed, it locked onto a powerful artifact called the Crown of Horns, which had a long-standing reputation of evil and an equally long history. Possessing this artifact, Myrkul spent many decades in the Crown, corrupting mortals and even enjoying his time in the Crown, free from the duties and obligations he had as a deity. However, at some point, though we are not told when, Myrkul was at least partly restored to divinity, becoming a quasi-deity of the dead, alongside Jergal, ironically in service to Kelemvor, whose viewpoints on death and the dead could not be further from those of Myrkul's, as Myrkul thoroughly enjoyed the creation use of the undead, malicious and destructive death, and abuse of his position as god of the dead, and Kelemvor has always striven for order and fairness in death, and despises the undead, viewing them as blasphemous. And in this way, this position of servitude might explain why, and I am speculating, Myrkul in particular is involved in this complot of the Absolute, whatever the Dead Three's involvement actually entails. For it must be the height of irony for Myrkul to serve under an upstart deity in his eyes that so differs from his representation of God of the Dead, and have little choice in the matter. Sadly, Myrkul historically has been far less active than Bane, and the last god amongst the Dead Three, Baal, which we will cover in a forthcoming video. The history we do have sees him as much more of an accomplice than a mover and shaker, a role that Bane more readily took to. Nonetheless, Myrkul still poses a threat, and a dire one at that, and it'll be quite interesting to see how Lorien handles these individual gods among the Dead Three, as they have stated several times that the Dead Three are involved in a complot against you, the player. One more year to go, approximately. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I will check you out next time. Take care.